So I've been thinking about confidence lately. Confidence and our particular neurodivergent neurotypes. AuDHD, autistic, ADHD. So many of these confidence videos out there on the interwebs will tell us to just take up space because we deserve it. And all these unmasking videos for us neurodivergents will also tell us to just be ourselves, genuine, authentic, authenticity. And hardly any of them say this, like, I think really important and like vital, exceptional point, which is that like safety in doing these things like isn't the same for all of us. The social constructs, for example, for marginalized demographics, us neurodivergent humans, plus these things, these other marginalized demographics that are layered on top of our neurodivergence, other forms of disability or difference, are not equal to something like, say, a white man doing this. Even a white neurodivergent man has a very different social construct than a white neurodivergent woman or a white neurodivergent non-binary human. So the right to take up space is unconditional, right? For sure. But whether it's safe to use that thing, like today in that room with those people, this is a different thing altogether. And staying silent in a room can also be its own way of confidently taking up space. And it's one of the many options in an individual moment, as long as you're the one who made that call with choice and intention. So that last part is where I want to spend a lot of this episode. So I'm going to try to be like really specific about what taking up less space or kind of blending in with confidence actually looks like. Because it usually shows up as just like some kind of like things that might not be really noticeable, that don't like look like much from the outside, at least. So let's look at some of the things that are blending in, maybe with less confidence or intention. So this might be things like apologizing before you speak, or maybe apologizing after you speak, apologizing for a misunderstanding that was someone else's misunderstanding to begin with, or maybe apologizing for missing subtext that nobody said out loud in the first place. So these things might kind of seem like taking on a kind of shame because nobody told you about whatever they were upset or displeased by in some way. They just left that to the subtext or figured you should know about that implied social construct that we're all adhering to that we don't put any words around. And they might have applied some blame that you didn't understand, know, or pick up on to even, discuss or try to resolve. This can also look like maybe putting like some sort of statement that you're trying to make in the form of a question, so it can get dismissed without like costing you anything socially. It can look like getting talked over and just letting it go, letting that happen. It might be, say, typing something in a chat and then deleting it right before or maybe even after you send it. I do that a lot. It could be getting left out of something and just saying nothing about it, just accepting that, even though you might be kind of thinking or ruminating about it for days after, and then you get really worn out from doing that thing. Maybe you don't volunteer in a group environment, even if there's, an opportunity to speak up in a meeting or a class or whatever. Or you all have to be paired up and you just wait till the end. You might wait until everyone else has like gone first. This is what I do. I wait until there's that, hey, does anyone else need to still go or need to be paired up or whatever? And then that's when I'll raise my hand, right? Not all the time, but often. It also might look like somebody gives you a compliment and you find a way to kind of toss it aside or explain it away, like your own success needs some sort of excuse attached to it. And now, some of these might not be confidence related specifically. They might be muscle memory that we've built up through decades of doing this in other cases. And we just feel like we should be doing these things because it's just what we do. Now, plenty of people do some of this. It's not necessarily a neurodivergent thing. It's not all neurodivergent people are the only ones that do this, like I referred to near the beginning of this episode. What I'm talking about, though, is the type of thing that got built up by specific kinds of punishment that we've experienced. And these things still exist, even though the current space, the current room you're in, doesn't necessarily warrant this kind of response. So I'm going to call this thing like blending in, because it's kind of like a form of camouflaging or masking. You're blending in because that's what's happening in a way when we do this thing. It has a lot to do with how we might feel about being perceived in certain scenarios. Like, we don't want to have that spotlight on us with those compliments. So in many of our social constructs, being different in any way got punished. And often this can start from a very, very early age, like in grade school and elementary school. It could have happened in a lot of ways across a lot of settings over those decades. We can find a whole bunch of them without a whole lot of difficulty if we were considered different or sticking out against the norm and being punished because we're not part of that just kind of baseline human thing. In more ways we were different, the more difficulty kind of got piled on to this experience. Like, we might have faced ridicule that somebody sort of minimized and just called it teasing, as opposed to what it really was. It was really ridicule. Or being constantly misunderstood and then paying the price for that misunderstanding, you only, for months, because your attempt at a clarification to resolve that misunderstanding wasn't believed, and now you're lying or making excuses or whatever else gets attached to that clarification. The oh so common one, friendships that ended where we never really even found out why. This is a punishment. Jobs lost, where you maybe kind of get managed out over many, many months, or put on a PIP and everybody was polite and nice the entire time. Harassment, that as a whole. There's research on the rates of bullying and social exclusion for autistic and ADHD people, and the numbers are super high. This pattern, this thing, isn't really in any kind of dispute. It's known. So the next part of this thing is really my hypothesis on all of this. It's based on the research, but it's most of it is just my own hypothesis from my lived experience in this particular space. So even though sort of blending in is harmful in many ways, we're doing this to reduce overt harm. This is so your brain and your nervous system that's held on to these punishments in the past, we're trying to avoid it in these situations, which is why we mask and camouflage in the first place. Like, our brains could be subconsciously going like, hey, this sort of making ourselves small and disappeared is maybe harmful as well, but it's less harmful than the things that might happen. So let's default to blending in and going kind of unnoticed whenever we can. So the catch here, I think anyways, is that doing this can end up as muscle memory, like some kind of automatic response that we have. Just what I reckon, for me at least, because an automatic response doesn't stop and just assess whether this particular room in this basement of the community center on this particular Thursday night meetup of the local chapter of the Birding Association is actually dangerous or going to be harmful. It just kind of boots up and fires. So you find yourself apologizing, before you said the thing that you came here to say, or you're just not saying it at all in the room where it might have been okay. Like, perhaps these birders might actually think you're pretty cool and know an impressive amount about juncos. They're not going to jump on you when you suggest that we count the juncos first in the next bird count or whatever. So there are two things possibly happening in this scenario. One of them could be low confidence, something about whether you're any good at the thing, whether you're good at, say, junko facts and identification or whatever it is. The other one is not wanting to be perceived, which is just the story about what's being noticed about you. This has cost you before in the past, and your very valid lived experience. This isn't a belief or something. This is valid. You've really experienced this. And for a lot of neurodivergent people, being noticed is the thing that came right before harm over and over and over again, right? Getting seen, it was when people started teasing you because you're different, perhaps way back in elementary school. And then that migrated throughout your life, right? The same thing kind of happened in different ways. Like you might have had it at your last doctor office visit, right? The admin might have started just making some notes about when you showed up. And maybe you made a very, very, very valid request for PPE, but they made a note, and you're standing out. And this could be harmful for you. And like, this isn't a belief. Again, this isn't a belief that you need to let go of. This could be really valid stuff that you've experienced for decades. Like, many frames of thought will want you to let go of these limiting beliefs, but there's a lot of reality in them. And letting go of these valid beliefs and facts, things that have kind of kept us safe from harm, is kind of gaslight adjacent, I think. So those two things that I mentioned, those two things, they're identical, or at least very similar from an external vantage point, but they come from very different places. And as such, they need different actions. They need different things from you. So that second one, being perceived, that's big enough that I'm going to give it its own episode. I'll talk more about that. But for now, I want it just kind of in there because it's relevant, because it changes what you're actually working on. And it's just so pervasive in so many of parts of our lives, really. So I do a lot of improv, and I noticed a similarity in improv. And we can use the improv thing for this concept to maybe make some shifts or try some new tactics in our lives, at least. And this part of things is something that reorganized a lot of the ideas in my own noggin around how I approach these social constructs in this way. So in improv, there's something called a backline. And this is a row of improv players standing at the back of the stage while a scene is playing out in front of them on the stage. If you've ever watched improv, you might kind of think of the backline as a bunch of people who aren't doing anything, just kind of watching too. They're just kind of standing there gawking. We're being kind of weird. And then sometimes they run onto the stage and do something weird, and then they go into a scene. It looks really weird if you're at your first show, but I digress. So the backline is an active position. You're in the show and you're doing a thing, even though the audience might not be able to tell that you're doing a thing. Like, you're up there, you're watching really hard, you're listening, active listening, you're tracking what the scene needs, and you're ready to step out and join the scene. Or you're choosing not to take the scene for reasons. This part's important. So good backline players are doing quite a bit up there. They're supporting the scenes. They might be setting things up for the people in the scene to do later if they go into it, jump into it, and jump out of it. Or they're watching the people who might need a save, for example. The things are, say, going south for somebody in a scene, and then they go in and tag that person out and start a new tangent, whatever. Knowing which scene is theirs and which scene they shouldn't go into, it isn't theirs. Like, the scene is going really well. They don't want to interrupt it. So it's very valid for them to make that choice not to go into the scene. So if you say, don't interrupt a scene, you wait until you are needed. Like, no improviser is going to say you're a failure and never stepped up at all. Like, you're totally doing your job. That's the perfect thing for the show. You're being a very good improviser. So this brings us to how to make some decisions when we're in these social environments. How do we make that call? What do we do? Do you engage with whatever it is with confidence? Do you bring up Juncos, how they should be prioritized in the next bird count at the association meeting, even though they were at the bottom of the list last year as a major decision supported by most people in that room? They didn't want to count the Juncos or whatever. I know nothing about birds or bird associations or clubs or anything. I chose a really bad analogy for this. I don't know if any of this is realistic. If you know, leave a comment. Anyways, do you decide to actively not bring the Juncos up because say you might want to handle the Junko thing on your own? For instance, it's not worth the hassle. You're going to do it on your own. Because there's two choices here. And oftentimes the just be yourself, take up space, that's very loaded advice. It's too general for all the situations. Basically, you have the right to take up space and mention those Juncos, right? There's no argument with that. You have the right to be a human in that space, just like the person in that community center basement sitting next to you who might prefer pelicans or whatever. It's safe to use that right in a given room on a given day, depending on things that have very little to do about whether you deserve the right to it. So it depends on who's in the room and what they can do to you, really. It depends on whether you can afford, say, to lose a job or be kicked out of a class or out of the group or whatever, or lose companionship of some sort or a living arrangement. It depends on whether you're the kind of person who gets read as difficult, perhaps for saying the same thing that someone else, the pelican person, gets read as confident and accepting or whatever. Like you bringing up that Junko thing might have a very, very different result than if Glenn also brings up that same Junko thing, the same thing you want. God damn it, Glenn. So race and gender and visible disability, immigration status, whatever, where you live, like local social constructs and support needs. All of these things change the results in whatever you're about to do, and pretending that those things don't exist or wouldn't be there is kind of dishonest, or reducing them to those are limiting beliefs or confidence levels. That isn't realistic or fair. And if you say double up, you add these additional marginalizations, you stack them all together, there's a lot of complexity, potentially a lot more risk too, and different results again. So none of these things are based on personal beliefs that need to be let go. So here are the questions I actually kind of run in my head, and I run them consciously now, which is new for me. So one of the things I ask, what could realistically happen if I speak up this particular thing here in this context? And I don't mean something like a catastrophized version or a worst case scenario. This, hopefully, is the realistic version based on whatever data you have. What could realistically happen if I don't say anything? And this might be an internal thing as well. How would I feel if I don't say anything? So who in this room is here that supports me? And do I actually know that thing, or am I guessing? Is this thing that I'm about to bring up, is it mine to say, or am I speaking outside of my lane, or am I taking up space that costs someone else in this space something? And really the big one, is it worth it? Is this thing worth it based on all the data, all the variables, all the information I currently have? So this list isn't complete. There might be things that you need to add to it, or things that aren't relevant to admit. You can also take into account the pros and the cons of these things, and then you can choose, knowing that the risk is real, some risk, because sometimes it is, but understanding how strong or how minimal the risks might really be can be beneficial. And this, I believe, leads to a lot of confidence. Now, I have done a lot of this kind of thing lately in a certain space that I'm newly in. It's an area where my values are being hit big time. It's important to me, so it carries some weight. and it's relevant to the space I'm in as well. So a value I carry is to speak up on things where I have the privilege to do so, like I am here in this video, because I have some of these privileges where when others don't, right? And I value a time when I can say, help others to have a voice as well. And doing this might help that. So I am being actively, in this case that I'm talking about, excluded from the space that says they value inclusion in the very thing that they're excluding me from. So me speaking up goes against the general social construct of that particular space. So there's a risk. And even after speaking up and expressing the exclusion, it has continued. So that also is something that I value, is continuing that work. So it has been very tough, though, to continue that work. There are cons here. There's energy and effort and stress. Going against that construct adds that stress. And there's been some physical ramifications afterwards too, real physical discomfort involved that rears its head because it's delayed because of my interoception stuff. So physical discomfort, stress, that stuff, it takes a hit. And when I'm already kind of on the edge of burnout sometimes, I really can't afford to burn out. But I have had immense levels of support from others to do this. And it's hard to tell, but I think it's genuine and not just being polite. But that sort of outward, explicit support has been enough from people. It's made it worth it to share my voice. So that's why I keep asking that last one. So this is all a new experience for me. And again, it is proven to be worth it. So a very important note that I need to add here at this point, part of my decision making is because I have that privilege. So I know these elements have really changed my decision, which is why it's so important to take some time with these sort of questions before unmasking and confidently speaking up, which is why confidently not speaking up also has a very valid space here. And that decision, too, is the one I also make on many occasions in the same space so I don't burn out, because that's a risk I can't currently afford. That's one of those deal breaker risks, physically or mentally. So that's bringing us to the other direction, the other option, which I think is underrated or undermentioned to the point of kind of being invisible or blending in. Like you can sit in these spaces with like this, say, big gaping hole in the material or something that is not being said or included, and it should be, whatever that happens to be. And this hole or thing that needs to be said, you can see it so clearly. You could fill it in like 90 seconds without really taking much time. Or you can decide that it's not yours to fill, or it isn't worth saying, for whatever reason that it might be, based on maybe that earlier list of things that I suggested assessing, or something else entirely. Like I've sat in classes and trainings where the topic genuinely should have, for example, included people like me, where the gap was serious, it was obvious, it was directly relevant to a lot of the people in that room and the topic at hand, and still I chose not to say anything at all. So making that call not to speak up in those cases has built up as much confidence for me as speaking up did, right? Possibly more, because these decisions were mine. So I want to be careful with this particular topic. Like I'm talking about gaps that are pretty serious gaps in a lot of these spaces, especially when they're directly related to the topic or the space at hand, and they're leaving out a large number of people who should be in and represented by that room. Hey, so I'm not trying to build a case for saying nothing at all. I'm not trying to build a case for not taking up space when it is our spaces to take up, right? But in the end, it is a choice that we get to make, and it is confidence on both sides of that choice. So you made the call. You played the back line in a space you are in, and you left, say, something unsaid, even though it was something that you valued and it would have, say, been appropriate to add. And now you might be sitting on everything you didn't say, and it's still in your noggin, right? Maybe you're lying there in a dark room, in bed, like 2 a.m., and all those unsaid things, it can turn into something that feels a lot like shame. That's how a deliberate pass on speaking up, not taking up space, staying on that back line, turns into like blending in a way that just doesn't seem like a chosen or confident act. So the back line already tells you what to do about this, because the backline player does have a job. We still have jobs even if we don't speak up. So these are some things that might help, some options. So one thing is to write it down. Write the thing down to keep your own record of this gap, the moment. Keep a record of the moment and what you would have said if you said it. This could be a journal, it could be a spreadsheet, it could be a database, it could be a post-it note, it could be a voice note on your phone, whatever it is. This nugget of wisdom and truth isn't for them, but it is for that post-it behind your monitor, perhaps. It's that post-it is still evidence for you later on, that you saw this important thing clearly and fairly and made an intentional decision around it. So this is giving your silence some kind of record attached to it. It's an intentional decision. And that record being attached to it means it's harder for that noggin of yours to rewrite that thing into potentially something else like shame at 2 a.m. or some other story altogether down the road. So consider making some kind of record for that thing. Tell one person. It might help to tell one person instead of an entire room in that, say, loaded social context. This could be a peer, it could be a friend, a family member, somebody in a group chat, say, who will absolutely understand whatever this thing was, maybe an actually neuro-inclusive space, or other people who share your identity or identities, plural, being witnessed by even one person. This can be kind of surprising of how far that can go. And it doesn't cost a whole lot. It probably doesn't cost quite as much. Sometimes, though, we are fairly isolated. I sure am isolated to a pretty large degree here. And this can be hard to find, even one other person. And if there is nobody right now or nobody who would understand the thing that you've encountered, the written record can really help in these kind of moments. Some of this work can be like seeking out some people over time, perhaps some communities, some more neuro-inclusive spaces. I also have a resources page linked in the description that helps with supports that might help you find this resource for you. Another thing you can do is find the room where you do step out. Maybe it's on something different entirely. This is one that I'd like to kind of emphasize, or like put on one of those post-its behind your monitor. So the backline is a position in a show you are still in. And even if every single room you sit in is a room where you have to kind of make those passes, not speak up, kind of blend in a little bit more, and you keep doing this thing and all of these different setups, all these different scenarios and contexts, all those scenes, this can feel like it's not really your decision as much anymore. And this sort of state has become a lot of your life. It became perhaps like the theater that you are going to, the only theater, a theater that doesn't have a good code of conduct or inclusion measures, peer groups now, neurodivergent led spaces where this tough thing isn't there to begin with because somebody built it that way on purpose. These places might have voices that came in before you and spoke up and have kind of taken hold in these safer spaces. They've done these adjustments already to make it safer for you to speak up. So you don't need to be the first person trying to make these changes in these spaces. And that's where the speaking, which can be verbal, text, body language, the energy you bring, all of you as a whole, you can practice it in these spaces. That's where inclusion is real. It's really happening there. And the unmasking work that you maybe want to do can actually begin, as opposed to being like some paragraph on a website with some sort of weak, hey, if this doesn't work for you, you can do whatever you want. That's not a really valid adjustment being made. And another thing that can help is acknowledging the labor that's involved in this. If a space wants your education, wants you to be the educator of your own inclusion, they can instead pay somebody for this thing. It doesn't have to be you. And you don't need to like start a business or make offers or have some rate or something like that either, unless you want. The point is is that it isn't owed by you simply by being present in those spaces. The space you're in doesn't get this educational or emotional labor for free just because you happen to be sitting there. You can often hold that boundary internally without ever announcing it to anyone, too. Now, I'm going to acknowledge that not announcing thing can also be a challenge if certain things do come up. Like sometimes there's situations where it's not possible to hold that boundary as easily. Say the meeting participation requirements or active pairings of people for tasks or whatever. Don't include you in some integral way. So in these circumstances, you may need to have some kind of conversation. So perhaps planning for that could be helpful if that's true in whatever context or space you're in. Another thing that can help is backing somebody else. So an improviser on that backline is always watching for who needs support and giving it in a very intentional way. And the best way that meets that need is what they're often looking for. So if somebody else in that space or room speaks up, you can opt to back them up. You can name what they said afterwards in private, or you can let them personally know that thing, or even publicly in whatever format is available to you. Text, voice, whatever. You can find the other person maybe that's getting left out and say something directly to them in support, or partner with them, or whatever else makes sense. All of that is taking up space. And it's also in improv called having their back, right? And none of it requires you to be the person up front. Know how you're going to get out too. Know what is too much for you. Decide in advance what would have to happen for you to leave that space, right? Or escalate a particular situation, or stop paying for that thing if that's an option. Of course, this only applies to spaces you are actually opting into, and leaving might not be an option, which for a lot of situations it isn't. Then the condition is about something else, right? What would have to happen before you told somebody in this case, or wrote it down formally, or did something else, whatever that might be? And you might think about these things, these kinds of decisions, just like the decision to speak up or blend in ahead of time. So you aren't trying to make that difficult decision in the moment, in the middle of things. Thinking about these things well outside of the most stressful or dysregulating situations can help in a lot of ways. If you can't say why you made the pass, you probably didn't intentionally make a pass on speaking. Those might be the cases you want to kind of focus on. You might be blending in these cases. You might be kind of disappearing, making yourself small. You might have reverted to those muscle memory pathways that our nervous system wrote for safety. If you decided intentionally to pass, that's confidence. It's done with intention. So in doing your thinking around these decisions outside of the moment, you're building that confidence for when you're in the moment to make the best decision for you. Silence that happened to you has kind of indecision around it. And when you go looking for a reason and there isn't one there, or you find yourself trying to make one up to build a narrative around it, might not be driven by confidence. But, and this is a big serious but, sometimes you couldn't have spoken. So shutdown is real, and a body, your nervous system that shuts, say, the door on most of our faculties is not the same thing as a decision that you just kind of dodged or didn't make to begin with. So we could be shut down. We could be situationally losing our voice. There's PDA as well. There might be some unrealized new threats in that space, or even new ones that we notice in ourselves. For example, that burnout that I mentioned earlier might be something that started to sort of crop up, something I started to understand in the moment. So these situations are worth being kind to yourself about, because it's not a lack of confidence at all. So how you build any of this, the room where it's happened in the moment is the hardest possible place to build this new skill, because your nervous system is like potentially running those threat checks the entire time, and there's nothing maybe left over for making decisions or practicing anything. So improvisers, we have your back on this. Improv is often used for building these skills even, which is why we practice being watched in a room where the stakes are zero, on purpose, usually badly, sometimes in front of other people who are also being bad on purpose. Like if you've ever been to a level 1 class show, the stakes are a little bit higher, but still very low. You know what I'm talking about. So failing is guaranteed. And it's a great way to learn as well. But again, the stakes need to be like really low or zero. So taking from that guidance 2 things you can try on your own, and nobody's watching either of these things. So the first one comes out of improv training. This is just standard practice. We often do it in classes. Walk around your own space with no tasks attached to anything. You're not cleaning up or preparing anything. You're not proving anything to the room even. Basically, you're just saying to yourself, internally or out loud if you can. I think out loud can be particularly helpful for this. Something like, I'm doing nothing. I'm letting my body walk around. I'm along for this ride, whatever this ride is. If walking doesn't work for you, or maybe you're in a situation where others are around and you don't want to be perceived this way, you can do it seated. You can narrate in your own head. You can just gesture or do it completely still. It's the physical version of being somewhere without performing for the room. This is kind of like being on the back line in your body and your brain, and it's just kind of developing a new kind of muscle memory around this. Some people notice something change, something shift while they do this kind of activity in their bodies or their minds, and other people notice nothing at all, which is also fine. There's no particular sensation you're supposed to find in this one. You might notice a shift in confidence, or maybe a shift in the way you hold yourself, or perhaps something else. Or again, nothing. It's all just information. The second one is one where you can practice how you want to position what you say, and you can practice this verbally or using text, writing it down. So take a real sentence you're actually going to say this week. Say it out loud with any and all the hedges left in. Like, sorry, this is probably obvious, but maybe we could try counting the Junkos as a priority. I don't know. If that's okay. Then say the same sentences with all those hedges taken out. We could prioritize counting the Junkos. Say the 2 sentences back to back and listen to both of them. You're not committing to the second version forever or in any scenario, because you might choose the first one on purpose as the most appropriate in some spaces for you. That's where the confidence comes in. You're proving to yourself that the second one is available to you if you need it, when you need it. So if speaking out loud isn't accessible or appealing, write these down and just read them. Understanding this is mostly what we're doing here, but building a practice around it is very individual for each of us. With a version that fits the spaces you're in and your actual risks is going to be yours to work out. It's going to be very unique. Some of it goes better with other people, which is what workshops can be useful for, because sometimes being in a room where you're being watched with no stakes involved is a very hard thing to simulate by yourself. But of course, there are so many other options. You could have the conversations or practice by yourself. You could use the exercises I just mentioned. You could practice with somebody you live with, someone safer, or you could even be around strangers if you can find somewhere where the stakes are really low. Like try some new phrasing at the corner store or something. The rooms and spaces we're in aren't all the same, and neither are the days. Some days you'll just go out there, and some days you might kind of stay on that back line. And both of these can be the right call in each situation. Having the choice at all is the thing that we're working on here. And I think it's fairly important work to do over time gradually, and something I'm still actively working on as I continue unmasking and building my own confidence. So that's it for this one. This is Wired Divergent. I'm Jen deHaan. Coaching and workshops for neurodivergent adults are over at my website on jendehaan.com. And there's also a newsletter and a bunch of other resources that you can check out for free. If you're listening on the podcast, this is also as a video on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, I also have guided regulation practices on the podcast version of this show, Wired Divergent. That's all for now. Bye for now.